Hi students, I'm Abhishek from Vidyavru, and in today's session we are going to talk about child development. And students, within child development we are going to focus on Piaget's theory, Piaget's cognitive learning theory. And today's session is not about Piaget's cognitive development, students. Please understand that Piaget has talked about learning also, and he has given us some very important concepts like schema, assimilation, accommodation and equilibration. So Piaget has tried to explain how we learn, how our learning takes place. So this session is going to be very beneficial, and if you have a trouble understanding what assimilation is, how it is different from accommodation, then you must definitely watch this session till the end, because in the end we are also going to discuss some past exam questions. And this video is short and complete English medium, especially for our students from South India, especially for our students from Northeast India, those who are unable to understand Hindi well. Such sessions are recorded especially for them. And if you like the video, please press the like button for sure, share the video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so till now. And while subscribing, make sure you press the bell icon as well. So let's get started. Let's first of all understand what schema is. So students, what do we mean by schema? What is meant by schema? See, schema is something like a cognitive structure. What do we mean by the word cognitive structure? Please understand, students, whenever the word cognitive is there, cognitive means something related to your mind. It means a mental structure. What is a schema? A schema is a mental structure. It is a cognitive structure. Sure? That means it is a mental representation. It is a mental representation. I'm going to make it very simple for you. It is your pattern of thinking. Students, it is your pattern of thinking. It is your way of thinking. It is a mental structure, the pattern in which you think. So that is what we mean by schema. Sure? For example, let me give you a very simple example. Water is a colorless and odorless liquid. Water is a transparent liquid. What is that? It is a concept, it is a pattern of thinking that is well entrenched in our mind. We already know it. Sure? So the moment I talk about water, you think of a transparent liquid. So the schema, students, the schema of water being a transparent liquid, it is already there in your mind. That mental structure, that cognitive structure is already there. Sure? So to define schema further, we can say it is a network of associations. Students, it is a network of associations which organizes and guides how we think, how we perceive information. For example, water. The moment I talk about water, a whole lot of things, a whole lot of associations are there with water. It is transparent. It is transparent. Yes, it is a liquid. It is odorless. It is colorless. It is tasteless. So a whole lot of associations such as transparent, liquid, colorless, odorless, tasteless, all these associations are related to a simple thing called water, simple schema which we call water. Sure? So that is what we mean by a schema. It is the way we think, it is our pattern of thinking, it is our mental structure. Sure? Now, when we talk about schema, then we have to understand assimilation also. Now we have gotten to the territory, students, we have gotten into the territory of learning. How do we learn? Piaget says we learn through three processes. We learn through three processes, and the three processes are assimilation, accommodation and equilibration. These are the three processes involved in our learning. Sure? So what is assimilation? Students, when you learn something new, and there is no change in your schema, there is no change, there is no modification in your schema, that is assimilation. What happens? When we learn something new, we grasp more information. So when that new information, students, when that new information is added to the previous information, when that new information is added to your previous information without any change in schema, that is what we call assimilation. So please understand, in case of assimilation, there will be no change in schema. Note it right away, because this point is very, very critical. No change in schema. Sure? The previous information, the previous knowledge gets incorporated, gets added to the new knowledge without any change in schema. Sure. So what does it mean? Fitting new information into our existing pattern of thinking, into our existing schema. Fitting new information into our existing knowledge. Sure. Some moments ago, I was talking about water. So now the student learns something new. Okay, when that colorless, odorless liquid, when it is frozen, it forms ice. So what happens? This new information, students, this new information has got added to the previous schema. What was the previous schema? The previous schema was that water is a liquid. Sure. So now new information gets added. What is the new information? When you drop the temperature, what happens? That liquid changes into a solid. And forms ice. Sure. So there is no change in my schema. I'm very easily able to add new information about ice to my existing schema, to my existing knowledge, and that is assimilation. So what happens? Students, in case of assimilation, you will be making use of the previous knowledge. The previous knowledge will be quite helpful. Why? Because it will act as a base. On which you are going to add more information. Sure. So it involves, please note it carefully, students, assimilation will involve the application of previous knowledge, and most important is the fact that there will be no change in schema, there will be no change in your cognitive structure in case of assimilation. Now let's look at some examples. Seeing a dog and calling it a dog. Now this seems obvious, but think of a young child who has seen maybe only his domestic dog. Think of a very young child, maybe a 2-year-old child who has seen only his domestic dog. Sure. So he knows what a dog looks like. A dog has 4 legs, a dog has fur, a dog is a cute little animal, it is somewhat affectionate. So all those network of associations are there. The schema of dog is already there in his mind. And what is the schema? The dog is a 4-legged animal which has fur. That is the schema in his mind. Sure. So when he goes to some new place, maybe he sees a new variety. Of dog. Maybe there is a Labrador at his place, at his home, and when he goes to his maybe aunt, so his aunt has a German Shepherd, but he is quickly able to recognize that, okay, this new variety is also a dog. A German Shepherd is also a dog. Sure. When he goes to some other place, maybe he visits his uncle now. So over there he sees another dog. Another variety, and this time it is not a German Shepherd, maybe this time there is an Alsatian, but still he is able to recognize that it is a dog. So the new information gets added, the new varieties get added to his schema. His schema is not to be changed. He is making use of his previous knowledge. And what was the previous knowledge? The dog is a 4-legged cute creature which is quite furry. Sure. What happens when you learn a new cooking recipe? All your knowledge about food, ingredients, you apply that previous knowledge, students. You apply your knowledge of handling flame. You apply your knowledge of how to add taste to your food items. You apply that knowledge. You make use of that knowledge and you learn a new cooking recipe. So your previous schema is quite important. You are adding new knowledge to your previous knowledge and you are making use of all that information which was already there in your schema. Sure. So learning a new cooking recipe. Similarly, maybe look at this student. So the student is right now trying to locate some places on a globe. So what was the previous information in the class? This same young girl had learned how to locate places on a map. And now she is trying to locate places on a globe. So new information, new experience is getting added to the previous experience. She already knows how to locate places on a map, and now she is trying to add new information, and very easily she is able to locate places on a globe also. Students, that is assimilation. There is no change in schema. Now what happens? Students, sometimes the schema has to be changed. Sometimes the schema has to be changed, and that is where we talk about accommodation. So Piaget says that yes, we learn through assimilation. Yes, we also learn through accommodation. The second process is accommodation. And please remember carefully, in case of accommodation, please note it down, there will be some modification. Students, there will be some modification. There will be some change in the schema. You will have to change your pattern of thinking somewhat. You will have to change your schema somewhat. Sure? Please note it carefully. If your schema, if your existing pattern of thinking is going to change, if there is going to be a modification in your cognitive structure, then that process is called accommodation. Sure? It is the process of modifying. Note these words carefully. It is the process of modifying existing schemas. Some schemas are already there in your mind, but now you have to change them. Now you have to modify them. Now you have to, adapt and add new information. New information is going to get added. But now what is happening? Your existing schemas will have to be changed, will have to be altered, and only after altering the existing schemas will you be able to add this new information. Now let me give you a classic example. This example is quoted very, very often. You know what happens? Students learn this all the time. Young children learn this all the time. Birds fly in the sky. Birds fly in the sky. Birds fly in the sky. They keep listening to it all the time from all the adults. Birds fly in the sky. So what is the schema in their mind? Students, the schema in their mind is that if there is something flying in the sky, it has to be a bird. You know what happens when they are very young? Everybody tells them birds fly in the sky. They end up thinking a schema is formed where they believe that anything and everything that is going up in there, that is flying in the sky, is a bird. They end up thinking like that. That is the schema which gets created. Now what happens, students? When this young girl who has never seen an aeroplane, who has never seen an airplane, when she looks at this airplane flying, she ends up calling it a bird. She ends up calling this airplane a bird. Sure? Now what happens? There is some new information. Something more is flying in the sky. Something else is also flying in the sky. New information is going to get added. But for that, she will have to modify, change and alter the schema. And what will be the change? That okay, yes, birds fly in the sky, but not everything. Students, not everything that flies in the sky is a bird. Certain other things can also fly in the sky. She looks at an airplane and now she realizes her parents tell her, no, it's not a bird. Don't get mistaken. It's not a bird, it's an airplane. So airplane can also fly in the sky. So now her schema has got changed, it has got modified. She no longer believes that everything that flies in the sky is a bird. She knows, okay, there are certain other things, that new information has got added. But to do that, she had to change her schema. Sure? Let's look at one more example. Another classic example, students. Now what happens? Sometimes you have to modify, change, alter your schema, but sometimes a completely new schema needs to be developed. So what happens in case of accommodation, students? In case of accommodation, new schemas may also be developed. Sure? Now a classic example, a classic case. What happens? Young children believe that four-legged creatures which are cute and furry, they are dogs, because most of them see dogs in their homes. They are very young. Sure? So they end up thinking? They end up thinking that, okay, if it is a four-legged domestic animal, if it is furry, if it is cute, then it has to be a dog. They end up thinking like that. Sure. Now that same kid who had identified all the dogs had very conveniently understood, and named the different dogs. But now what happens? He sees a cat for the first time. Even a cat doesn't look very different. It is four-legged. Yes, even the cat has fur. So the kid ends up thinking that it is a dog. Sure. Now what happens? The parent ends up telling the kid that, okay, it is four-legged. Yes, it is furry. Yes, it has some whiskers also. But this cute animal is not a dog. A new schema has to get formed. A new schema of cat has to get formed, and then only the child will be able to add new information. To add this new information about this cat, there was some conflict. The child was making a mistake. There was some disequilibrium. There was some conflict. And to resolve that conflict, now what happens? The child will have to learn and create some new schema. Now the child will have to learn this new concept, create this new cognitive structure, create this new mental pattern of what a cat is. Sure? So that is what we mean by accommodation. The modification or the change in schema will be there, or at times a new schema will have to be created. Sure. Students, I hope you have understood the difference between assimilation and accommodation. And now we move on to the next concept, and that is equilibration. See what happens. Equilibration, look at the equilibrium. Piaget says two major processes of learning are there. There is assimilation and there is accommodation. Now what happens if the new knowledge is getting added to the previous knowledge? If new knowledge is getting added to the previous knowledge and there is no change in the schema, we call it assimilation. Sure. But sometimes the change has to be made, and if the change or the modification in the schema is necessary, then we call it accommodation. Sure. Now where to use assimilation and where to use accommodation? Students, what happens? Accommodation is required only when there is some state of disequilibrium. What is disequilibrium? Very simple. When the new knowledge conflicts with the previous knowledge, when the new knowledge is at odds with the previous knowledge. Sure. The first example, there was some conflict. What was the conflict? The child was feeling that an airplane is a bird. That was the conflict. Sure. In the second example, there was a conflict. There was some disequilibrium. What was the conflict? The new knowledge was that there is something called a cat. It is four-legged. It is cute, but it was not a dog. So there is some disequilibrium. There is some conflict. And to resolve that conflict, to resolve that disequilibrium, you will have to change your schema or you will have to modify it. Sure. So this process, students, this process of accommodation is used only in case of disequilibrium. When the new knowledge is, opposite to what you have learned earlier. Sure. So it is striking a balance. What is equilibration? Very simple. Equal. Focus on the word equal. We are trying to maintain a balance. Between these two learning processes. So what is equilibration? Maintaining balance. Students, the process of maintaining balance between assimilation and accommodation. What is equilibration? I'm repeating it. The process of maintaining a balance between assimilation and accommodation. Using assimilation where assimilation is required, using accommodation where accommodation is required. And by now you know that if disequilibrium is not there, if the conflict is not there, then assimilation will keep on happening. You will keep learning new things through assimilation. But if the disequilibrium or the conflict is there, then we will have to use accommodation. Sure. So basically equilibration is where to use assimilation and where to use accommodation. That sum total, that balance, that overall process of using assimilation and accommodation based on the need, based on the situation is called equilibration. Sure. And students, now we will take up some past year questions to test whether we have understood these concepts or not. This particular question I have taken it up first. Why? Because it posed a lot of challenge to the students. Read it carefully, read it once. Sita has learned to eat rice and dal with her hand. Sita has learned to eat rice and dal with her hand. This is past CTET question, students. When she is given dal and rice, she mixes rice, she mixes dal, and she starts eating. See, the situation is that Sita eats rice with her hand, Sita eats dal with her hand. Sure. Now what happens? Once she was given rice and dal together, then straight away what she did? She mixed rice and she mixed dal and she started eating it. So what has she done? Is it assimilation or accommodation? Students, ask yourself, what was the schema? Now listen to me carefully. The schema was rice is edible. It is something which you can eat because she eats it all the time. It is something which you can eat with your hand. Yes, those were the schemas. Rice can be eaten with the hand. Rice is an edible item. So is dal. Dal is also edible. And dal can also be eaten with the hand. Yes or no? These are the schemas. Now what happens? The moment she is provided both the things together, she mixes both the things and she starts eating them with hand. Very simply, the new information. What is the new information? The new information is that, okay, rice plus dal, this combination is also edible. And you can eat it with a hand. You can eat it with your hands. This was the new information. What? The combination can also be eaten with your hand. It is also edible. So that new information is getting, added to the previous information readily. There is no change. There is no conflict. What is the conflict? In fact, it seems that it is obvious. Why does it seem obvious? Because there is no conflict. There is no disequilibrium. The new information is gelling absolutely well. It is getting added to the previous information very, very easily. No change in your mental pattern, no change in your pattern of thinking has to be made. And if no change has to be made, if your schema has not to be touched, has not to be changed, then this is definitely assimilation. So what happens? Undoubtedly, she has assimilated rice and dal into her schema for doing things. Sure. So it was assimilation. Next question, students. Next question, just read it once. Now I know you will be able to, score it. Now I know you have got the answer. According to Piaget, specific psychological structures, the same thing which we were calling schema, the same thing which we were calling mental structure, cognitive structure. Now they are calling it a psychological structure. The organized ways of thinking which help us make sense of our experience. So what are these structures known as? What are these mental patterns? What are these cognitive structures known as? Undoubtedly schema. The answer is 2. The answer is schema. Sure. Let's look at the third question. Students, read it once. What term or phrase does Piaget use for mental structures? That Piaget uses for mental structures which are the building blocks of thinking. So very important, students, The mental structures which are the basis, which are the building blocks of your thinking, those mental structures, those cognitive structures, we have discussed them thoroughly. A while ago we were talking about them, and these mental structures, these psychological structures which act as the building blocks of our thinking, we call them schemas. Students, we call them schemas. Question number 3. Now let's look at the next one. Question number 4. The process of changing the existing schemas. Look at this word, very, very important. If you come across this word, such words, alter, modify, change, alter, modify, change the existing schema. If you have to change the existing schema, change the existing cognitive structure, if you have to change your pattern of thinking, if you have to alter it, if you have to modify it, then what will happen? Then it will be undoubtedly accommodation. In fact, students, in English language, accommodation means modification. Accommodation means modification or alteration. So it is nothing but modification. Sure? So read it carefully. What is it? Modifying, changing, altering your schema to include new information. Sure? And when is it required? When is it required? I have told you, when there is some conflict, when there is some disequilibrium, when the new information is opposite to what you had learned earlier. Sure? And now comes the last question for today, and students, that is to be read once. According to Piaget, schema building occurs as a result of modifying new information to fit existing schemas, and by modifying old schemas as per the new information. Read it carefully. According to Piaget, because two things are going to be there simultaneously. According to Piaget, schema building occurs as a result of modifying new information to fit existing schemas. If you are using existing schemas, if you are keeping the existing schemas intact, you are using the existing schemas and you are modifying, you are changing the new information, then what happens? Then this is assimilation. Students, I'm using the short form, then this is assimilation. Sure? Look at the other one. Now what happens? And by modifying, this is the second part, and by modifying old schemas. If you have to modify old schemas, students, if you have to modify old schemas, then it is accommodation. If you have to modify, change, alter the old schemas, then this is accommodation. That means first it was assimilation. The first thing was assimilation, and the second thing is accommodation. Read it carefully. The first thing is assimilation and the second thing is accommodation. Sure? So what is the answer to be marked? Students, the answer to be marked is these two processes are, the first process was assimilation, the second process was accommodation. So the answer will have to be option 2, assimilation and accommodation. If you are modifying or changing the old schemas, it is undoubtedly accommodation. Sure? And if you are using the existing schemas, if you are using the old schemas, if you don't have to change or modify or alter the old schemas, then it was assimilation. So first it was assimilation, then it was accommodation. So students, the answer option is 2. So now with that we will wind up today's session. I hope you have understood whatever I have taught you. And if you like our way of teaching, then definitely you must be a part of our live batches for CTET and other teaching exam preparation. So the numbers are given on your screen. Please call upon those numbers and join our live batches. Thank you so much.